He was the poorest student in class. Everyone mocked his worn-out clothes and called him a failure. Even teachers ignored him. But one exam changed everything and made him a national hero. Subscribe to the channel to watch more amazing stories like this every week. He sat in the last row of the classroom, as usual. His name was Daniel, and to most of the students, he was practically invisible, except when they wanted to laugh at someone. His shirt was always wrinkled, his shoes worn down, his backpack torn at the edges. Every detail about him screamed poor. The whispers never stopped. "Did you see his shoes? My dog has better ones," one boy sneered. "Look at his notes. Do you think he even owns a proper textbook?" Another added, laughing. Daniel kept his eyes down. He never fought back. What was the point? Words hurt, but he had learned to absorb them quietly. He lived with his single mother in a tiny apartment that leaked when it rained. She worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. New clothes, gadgets, or fancy books. Those were luxuries Daniel could never dream of. The teachers weren't much better. They didn't exactly bully him, but they ignored him. To them, he was just another struggling student who would never go far. If Daniel raised his hand in class, most teachers barely glanced his way before choosing someone else. He didn't complain. He had learned to keep his thoughts inside. But what no one knew, what Daniel had never told anyone, was that at night, in that cramped apartment, he devoured books he borrowed from the old library downtown. Math, physics, philosophy, even advanced problems no one in his school could solve. He didn't just study. He lived for the challenge. Still, during the day, he played his part, the poor, quiet boy in the back row. The turning point came when the school announced a special examination. It wasn't an ordinary test. It was a nationwide academic competition. The top student would win a scholarship, recognition, and a chance to enter one of the most prestigious universities in the country. For most of the class, it was just another test. For Daniel, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. But when he walked into the exam room, the usual taunts followed him. "You even gonna bother writing your name, Daniel?" One classmate jeered. "Don't trip over your shoelaces before you fail." Another laughed. Daniel ignored them. He took his seat at the far corner, gripping his pencil tightly. When the papers were distributed, a hush fell over the room. The exam was brutal, far beyond what the students were used to. Equations that twisted into pages, logic puzzles that seemed impossible, problems even some teachers would struggle with. Around the room, panic spread. Pens tapped nervously. Students whispered in frustration. But Daniel's eyes lit up. For the first time in his school life, he wasn't lost. He wasn't scared. He understood. Each problem was like a locked door, and he held the key. His hand moved across the page, faster and faster, solving equations, writing proofs, connecting ideas. The other students glanced at him and rolled their eyes. "Look at him pretending he knows something," one muttered. "He's probably just scribbling nonsense," another smirked. But Daniel didn't hear them. For the first time ever, he felt free. His heart raced, not from fear, but from excitement. He had waited his whole life for this moment, and he wasn't going to waste it. 3 hours later, the exam was over. Students stormed out, angry and frustrated. That was impossible. Total waste of time. No one could solve that. Daniel walked out quietly, clutching his worn-out backpack. He didn't say a word, but deep inside, he knew this was different. He had left nothing blank. He had written every answer with certainty. The following week, the results were posted. Students crowded around the board, pushing and shoving to see their scores. "Ugh, I barely got half right. This test was rigged." Then a gasp. "Wait, what? That can't be real." Daniel, standing a few steps back, watched as the whispers spread. One by one, the students turned to look at him, not with mockery, but with shock. At the very top of the list, in bold letters, was his name. Daniel Carter, 100%. The room fell silent. "No way," one boy muttered. "He must have cheated." Another snapped, his voice shaking. But the truth was undeniable. Daniel had scored a perfect result on an exam designed to break even the best students. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. Every eye was on him. But the story didn't end there. Because 2 days later, the principal called Daniel into his office. Waiting inside were 3 men in suits, representatives from the National Examination Board. They weren't there to congratulate him on just a good grade. They were there because Daniel hadn't just passed. He had solved a problem no one else in the country had managed in years, a problem that had stumped professors, graduate students, and researchers. And this quiet, poor boy, the one everyone mocked, had cracked it in under 3 hours. The men leaned forward. Daniel, one of them said, "Do you realize what you've done?" Daniel shook his head nervously. I just solved the exam." The man smiled faintly. "No, you've done much more than that. You've changed everything." The room was silent after the man's words. Daniel sat across from the 3 exam board officials, his heart pounding. He didn't understand what was happening. All he had done was answer the questions on the test. But to them, it was much more. One of the men slid a paper across the desk. It was his exam sheet, covered in Daniel's handwriting. Red marks and notes lined the margins, not corrections, but exclamations of surprise. "This question," the man said, pointing to one of the problems. "Do you know what this is?" Daniel hesitated. "It was the hardest one, a number theory proof." The man nodded. "Hardest is an understatement. It's a problem that's been unsolved for nearly a decade. Mathematicians have debated it, written papers, but no one reached a clean, definitive solution. Until now." Daniel blinked, stunned. His hands trembled as he stared at the page. Could it be true? He hadn't just passed an exam. He had solved something the world's brightest minds couldn't. The men exchanged glances. Then the eldest leaned forward. "Daniel, you have a gift. A rare, extraordinary gift. And the world needs to see it." News spread quickly. By the next morning, Daniel's name was everywhere. The headline on the local paper read, "Poor student solves impossible problem." National news channels picked it up. TV reporters showed up outside his small apartment building, microphones in hand, eager to capture the story of the boy who went from invisible to genius overnight. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't being mocked. He was being celebrated. But with the sudden attention came disbelief. Some people insisted he had cheated. Others accused him of stealing answers. On social media, arguments raged. "There's no way a kid from nowhere solved that. He's a fraud. He's just lucky." Daniel tried to ignore it. He had lived with humiliation all his life. This wasn't new. What was new was the handful of voices who defended him: professors, mathematicians, and examiners who had verified his work line by line. They all agreed. It was real. Back at school, everything had changed. The same classmates who once mocked him now stared in silence when he walked past. Some were curious, others resentful. The laughter was gone, but so was the easy invisibility he once had. At lunch, one of the boys who had made fun of his shoes approached him. "Hey, Daniel," he muttered awkwardly. Congrats. You really showed us." Daniel nodded politely, but said nothing. Deep inside, he remembered every cruel word, every laugh at his expense. Forgiveness wasn't impossible, but forgetting was. Then came the invitation. A letter arrived, sealed with the crest of one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Inside, it wasn't just an acceptance. It was a full scholarship, tuition, housing, everything covered. Daniel's mother cried when she read it. "You did it, Daniel," she whispered, holding him tight. "You changed our lives." For Daniel, it wasn't just about leaving poverty behind. It was proof that no matter how much the world had tried to bury him under humiliation, his determination and love of learning had carried him through. Months later, Daniel stood in a grand lecture hall, not as a student this time, but as a guest. Professors filled the seats, mathematicians and scientists leaned forward eagerly. At the front of the room, Daniel presented his proof to the world. He spoke calmly, clearly, his once-worn clothes replaced by a simple suit provided by the university. The boy who had been invisible now held the attention of the brightest minds in the country. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. Scholars stood to their feet, clapping and nodding in admiration. One professor whispered to another, "He's not just talented. He's one of the greatest minds of his generation." But Daniel never forgot where he came from. Even with fame and recognition, he continued visiting the library where he had spent countless nights studying alone. He donated books, mentored younger students, and told them his story, not to brag, but to remind them that genius could come from anywhere, even from the poorest corners. And when people asked him how he did it, his answer was always simple. "I study because I love learning, not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove to myself that I could. Back at his old school, a new generation of students walked the same halls. On the wall near the main entrance, a framed plaque displayed his name. Daniel Carter, the student who changed everything. Some kid stopped to look at it, wide-eyed, as teachers explained the story. And in that moment, Daniel's journey wasn't just his own. It was a message carved into the heart of the school forever. It doesn't matter where you come from. What matters is what you choose to become. The boy they mocked, the poor student they humiliated, had become a national hero. Not by fighting back with anger, not by seeking revenge, but by holding on to knowledge, determination, and the quiet belief that one day, just one day, he would be seen for who he truly was. And now, the world could no longer look away.